Hello and welcome to the Food for You and the Planet podcast, brought to you by Healthy Plan Eat Online Farmers Market. I'm Dr. Rosemary Ostfeld. Together, we'll hear from leaders in environmental science, agriculture, medicine, nutrition, entrepreneurship, and more. Subscribe to hear the latest in healthy and sustainable food solutions. Today's episode features Dan Kittredge, founder of the Bionutrient Food Association. Dan is a lifelong farmer, educator, and passionate advocate for growing nutrient-dense food. With decades of experience in regenerative agriculture and a deep understanding of soil science, Dan has made it his mission to empower farmers, gardeners, and consumers to unlock the full potential of their crops and landscapes. Growing up on an organic farm, Dan witnessed firsthand the challenges and opportunities of cultivating healthy, sustainable food systems. Over the years, he developed a keen interest in the intersection of soil health, plant vitality, and human well-being. This journey led him to found the Bionutrient Food Association, a nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting food quality as the central tenet of health and sustainability. Thank you so much for joining the podcast today, Dan.
Wonderful to be here.
All right, let's launch into our first question. So, what is the Bionutrient Food Association and what type of work does it do?
Yeah, we're an educational organization. We've been around since 2010. Our initial few years of work was basically with farmers, growers of all scales, backyard gardeners, didn't matter what the scale was, teaching courses, basically about how plants evolve to grow. For 420 million years, plants have been growing on planet Earth without the use of fertilizers or insecticides or fungicides or rototillers or compost or anything else. And um, they seem to do quite well. And now we have we're taught that we have to add all these things to the land, and um, actually not true. So basically, it comes from my background as a farmer, how to work more in harmony with nature and improve soil health, farm viability, pest and disease resistance, flavor, aroma, nutritional value, all those things we think are basically intrinsically interrelated. That was the first few years of the organization was just education, ran a conference, things like that. And now for the last few years, we've been doing a lot of research to identify what the scale of nutrient variation in food is. Um, See if we can find any correlations between causal factors, like is it the soil or is it the certification? Is it the genetics? Is it the management practices, et cetera? Is there dramatic nutrient variation? And if there is, what causes it? And then as well to look at how we can build instrumentation that can be used to measure that variation. So the concept being that you can, as someone who buys food, go to your point of purchase, flash a light at the carrot, at the blueberry, at the apple, at the beef, and actually read the nutrient levels in the food with a scientific instrument, to empower people to basically make the best choices for themselves and their families, and use the economic incentive of profitability to inspire farmers to focus more on nutrition as opposed to volume and aesthetic, which seems to be how the market currently um, compensates them. So yeah, we do a lot of stuff.
Yeah, it sounds like you do a lot of great work with your organization, and I'm excited to dive more into some of those facets as we go through some of these questions. So, how did you become interested in food and agriculture?
Well, I grew up on an organic farm. Actually, before it was called organic, before there was a certification, my parents were Um, they basically helped to write some of the first organic standards in the US. They helped run an organic farming organization called Northeast Organic Farming Association for 35 years. So founded and ran and wrote the certification for and organized the conference for and wrote the journal for and everything else. So I basically grew up in the movement, running out of my house. So didn't have too much of a choice unless you think that people choose their parents before birth, and there's a whole thing about incarnations and things. But either way, yeah, it was my childhood. Um, But what brought me into this work was basically um, thinking was a great lifestyle. The homesteading, small farmer lifestyle was a wonderful way to raise a family. But also looking around me and looking at all the farmers that I knew having basically a really hard time paying the bills. And um, and then when I got married, realizing that I also was like those farmers and that I couldn't make a living farming and was trying to figure out how to make a living. And I thought that if organic was better, then my plants should be healthy. And being eaten alive by a pest, by a larvae or a flesh-eating fungus is actually not a sign of health. Um, Even though organic farmers want to tell you we're better and we have to struggle with insect pressure because we're better. And no, it's your plants are weak and that's why they have insect pressure. And they're weak and that's why they have flesh-eating funguses. And the issue is that you are not that good of a farmer because you have pest and disease pressure. That's nature telling you that this plant is unfit for reproduction. And conventional farmers, chemical farmers, use toxics to kill the diseases. That doesn't mean their crops are nutritious. Organic farmers aren't allowed to use those chemicals, but that doesn't mean their plants are healthier. It just means they have less toxins. So I started reading. I started going to conferences. I started, attending seminars and studying, and because I want to try to figure out how to make a living. Um, and actually, plants have evolved with symbiotic relationships with their microbiomes to flourish if provided the, appropriate conditions. And so by working to create a dynamic on my farm where my soil health was higher, my farm profitability went up. And I had enough downtime because I was making enough money to start sharing with my friends and neighbors how to do this. So that turned into courses and that turned into an organization. So um, it's been a long road, but yeah, I'm around the planet these days on a regular basis doing stuff. So it's really spreading quite excitingly.
Yeah, that's definitely really exciting. And especially seeing all of the health challenges that people are facing, it's so important that people are eating food that is healthy and has all the right nutrients. So, what is bionutrient food?
Well, the Bionutrient Food Association is an organization. Nutrient density is the term we've coined to talk about that nutritional variation in food. And the concept would be that like this carrot is at 20 out of 100, that carrot is 80 out of 100, that carrot is 40 out of 100. So it's not like you are local or not, or you are organic or not. The level of nutritional intensity or which is flavor, right? Because nutrition and flavor are basically the same thing. The more a carrot tastes like a carrot, the more nutritious it is. The more a carrot does not taste particularly good, the less nutritious it is. Tomatoes, peaches, like local and organic don't matter, I would say. What matters is nutrition, which is flavor, which is the way we have evolved to discern what's good for us and what's not. So nutrient density is the term we've created to talk about that spectrum of variation. And we, work to help anybody who cares figure out how to do better. And then also to figure out how to measure and test. And so the part of the grand vision is to um, have people who buy food have in their hands the ability to measure the food they have. So they can see not just with their tongue, like, oh, that tastes good, that doesn't taste good, but actually with an instrument, like this one is 8 out of 10, this one is 2 out of 10. Um, yeah. And then they can post that on social and tell people at this point of purchase, at this brand, on this day, this was the reading. And at that point of purchase, on this day, this brand, that was the reading. So everybody has an incentive for nutritional caliber of the food to be increased.
That level of transparency is also really important and obviously is going to empower people to make decisions that are good for them. Can you explain some of the basics of the relationship between soil biology, plant health, and human nutrition?
Sure. So I mean, there's this thing called evolutionary biology, which is basically a science which talks about how everything started off as single-celled organisms, and now we've got these much larger things. And when did the fungi evolve, and on the which tree of life, and um, um, one of the basic insights from evolutionary biology is that the microbes came first, and that the plants and the animals came after that. And actually, um, I think it's something like 90% of the cells in our bodies are not human. You identify as a human, you say that's a plant over there, and then somewhere, and there's these microbes around and about. Like actually, like we are completely um, interwoven with uh, profound numbers of different species of beings from another kingdom. Um, and the function and health of our microbiome, the well-being of those beings within us, is intrinsically related to our well-being. And it's exactly the same for plants. Plants cannot live without their microbiome, right? There is a deep symbiotic, relationship, co-creative relationship between plants and microbes. Plants are covered with green leaves to make sugar through photosynthesis, which is the foundational foodstuff which they give to the microbes in the soil, who then go and digest the soil and create nutrients to feed the plant. So, like, God did not invent fertilizer, right? I mean, we can talk about who invented fertilizer, but it was not nature. Plants have evolved a symbiotic relationship with microbes to make sugar in the leaves, to inject it into the soil, to feed the microbes, who then go and feed the plant. And that's a beautiful virtuous circle. And so only when the plant has a healthy microbiome is it able to access the full spectrum of nutrients that it needs to flourish. Um, and those compounds, which we call flavor and aroma, there's fancy words in science for it, like terpenoids and phenolics and alkaloids and stuff like that, which is what you know, our forebears who were medicine people used to call, um, medicine, right? There were medicinal plants, the things that had spices and things that had intense flavor and aroma are actually full of these things which are the things which cause us to be well. Those intense flavors and aromas like are built of the nutrients that our bodies need to operate well. And so when something does not have a strong flavor, it does not have high levels of those nutrients. And so um, the more the plant has a well-functioning microbiome, the more it can access the full suite of what it needs from the ecosystem, the more it's able to build those things into its body, which we call flavor and aroma, which are also the things which make it indigestible to insects and diseases and stuff like that. So, um, different organisms have different levels of digestive system function. You can't eat a bale of hay and digest it because you don't have four stomachs, but a cow can. Everyone's like, yeah, great, that makes sense. Well, the Colorado potato beetle larvae can't digest protein. It doesn't have a liver. So when the potato plant is actually building complete proteins through its biological process, it becomes indigestible to a Colorado potato beetle. And those complete proteins are part of the biochemical process on the way to flavor and aroma. So a potato plant that didn't get eaten by Colorado potato beetles has potatoes that are more nutritious than one that was susceptible. And it's beautiful. Nature is so beautiful. It's all like it's just if you stand back and with respect try to understand as opposed to trying to control, um, it's all there. It's just that most of us farmers haven't been taught how nature evolved things to work. We've been taught by people who are selling us stuff to buy the things that are being sold to us and apply them. And that may be profitable for the people who are selling us things, but it's not actually beneficial for the land. Well, there are some things which our lands need now because of how they've been degraded over the past few hundred years. But those, in most cases, once you address the imbalance from a natural material, you don't need to buy anything else again. Um, and yeah, I think I covered some bases there. I can stop. I can go on for many hours on these topics, so I'll try to control myself.
That was great. No, I love this. You have so much knowledge, so it's cool to hear it. How can farmers implement practical strategies for improving things like soil structure, fertility, and also the ability to have good water retention?
Um, well, I mean, it's not a silver bullet, single, like thou shalt do this and all will be well kind of framework. It's much more of like your land is a living ecosystem, and um, right now what it needs is different than what it needs in October, is different than what it needs in April. And your land is different than your neighbor's land because it's experienced different things over the past 5 years than your neighbor's land has. And so the first thing is to realize that your land is it's a living ecosystem and it has needs that modulate and evolve over time. And um, I think the basic process when I teach courses is is I have a basic checklist I've got, like, is there enough air in the soil? Um, if you try to reach your hand down in and it's really tight, it gets underneath your fingernails in an inch and a half, there's no air for the microbes to breathe. And the microbes are the bottom of the food chain, and so they'll asphyxiate and they'll die. And so it's your responsibility to ensure that there's an aerobic zone. Well, ideally, that aerobic zone continues down for quite some distance. So air is important. If you don't have enough, work to address that. Water, another really important piece of the puzzle, right? Microbes, again, bottom of the food chain, need water to drink. If it's July and it hasn't rained for a month, and you put your hand down into that ground and it's powder, they've all died, right? Mass genocide has occurred because of how you manage that land. Like, it is critically important that moisture be maintained, or, in one way or another, it's your responsibility as caretaker to maintain that. Um, Food, right? Microbes need food to eat. And so, if the soil is bare, um, like say you take the crops out in the fall and you leave the soil bare until the spring. Well, the microbes didn't have anything to eat all winter long because there was no green leaves and no plant matter in the soil. Um, so air, water, and food, massive, right? I mean, there's kind of self-evident. Chickens need it, cats need it, dogs need it, cows need it, children, all organisms that we know of need air, water, and food. And we don't necessarily think about the fact that the microbes, which are the foundation of the well-being of our land, also need air, water, and food at all points in time. The last one I talk about is minerals. Um, because of how land's soils have been treated through tillage and erosion and things like that. In many cases, we don't have a sufficient level of things like copper and boron and manganese and sulfur and stuff like that. Those are all required for life to function. And so you may need to add some rock dust or um, some basic minerals. Beyond that, the microbes themselves are really important, right? If you, for whatever reason, some of the species that you'd like to have present are no longer, then re-inoculating with them is key. But it's really about sort of being sensitive and being present and um, understanding your land as a living um, being ecosystem, and paying attention to what it needs, and providing that. And if you do that, then you can spend most of your time playing with your kids, or whatever, because nature's designed to work.
What are some of the tools farmers can use to measure the quality of their soil?
Well, um, there's things like a penetrometer is a great way to measure the level of air in the soil, or you can use your hand. Um, you can use a moisture meter to measure the level of moisture in the soil, or you can use your hand. Um, I mean, there's lab tests. You can send samples into labs to look at mineral levels. And there's a vast array of different ways of measuring and assessing. Um, I'd like to talk about the tools that we're built with, I think, um, I mean, I'm of the opinion that humans have the capacity to communicate directly with nature, that, all of our indigenous cultural forebears talk about how, we could talk to the wolf and talk to the tree and things like that. And, it's not like actual words coming out of your mouth and coming out of the wolf's mouth. It's sort of more on a psychic level. I think some people have had the experience of that kind of psychic communication. And so my perspective is that we have the ability to communicate with our land, um, with the apple tree, with the tomato plant, etc., or the field. And you can actually ask, how are you today? Is there anything I can do for you? Um, and some people will get things in dreams, and some things people will have things pop into their heads, and some people will actually be able to actually communicate directly. Um, so measurement can happen in many forms. We have the Western Rational Empirical Framework of lab tests and sensors, which I think are completely relevant and valuable and appropriate. But I think the other end of that spectrum is our inbuilt modes of perception, which perhaps are superior, um, for a number of reasons, which I'm not sure we're going to get into right now. But yeah, it's start off with the act of, engaging the process of discernment by whatever mode you want. Use your body, use a little sensor in your hands, something off to a lab. It doesn't really matter, but begin that dance of listening and feedback loops, and use the scientific method. Try this over here and try that over there, and if something doesn't seem to do any difference, but that other thing does, then maybe there's wisdom there. Experimentation, I think, is really valuable.
What is some of the cutting edge research being done on nutrient dense food?
Um, well, uh, for better or for worse, our organization is at the cutting edge of this research. Um, we've been looking, at taking samples from many, many thousands of, you know, um, different crops, dozens of different crops, thousands of samples, hundreds and hundreds of farms, multiple continents, looking at the soil, looking at the food, looking at the management practices, etc. Um, for starters, identifying that the nutrient variation in food is absolutely massive. Like, if you take carrots, for example, just as a crop, like the level of sulfur in this carrot, maybe 4 times as much as the level in this carrot. If you do phosphorus, it may be 8 times. This carrot has 8 times as much phosphorus as that. If it's polyphenols, it may be 20 times as high. If it's antioxidants, it may be 40 times as high. The variation 40 to 1, 20 to 1, 8 to 1, that we found across the board in wheat, in potatoes, in beef, in blueberries, and apples. Like every single thing we've looked at um, has nutrients in the food from high to low at this massive variation. So not that, a carrot is just vitamin D or just copper. A carrot is a whole biochemical matrix. But um, yeah, it does seem that there is a really, really significant variation in the level of nutrition in our food. And the whole food. I'm not even talking about processed product, right? Ultra processed junk, which people make the mistake of calling food. Um, like that is a whole different conversation, and it is the ratios of stuff in it is really just sort of not beneficial for you. Um, so, A, identifying the scale of variation, B, connecting to what causes it, and it does not seem to be that local connects to quality of food, does not seem that organic connects to quality of food, does not seem that different soil types connect to quality of food, does not seem that different genetics connect to quality of food. The only thing that seems to connect to the nutritional quality of food is the level of life in the soil. The more well functioning the microbiome on that piece of land, the higher the nutrients in the food. So you can be a local organic farmer who is not doing practices that cause the soil life to be high and have relatively low levels of nutrients in your food. And you can be a big farmer 1,000 miles away who maybe uses, a little bit of fertilizer, but actually through a series of good management practices has high levels of nutrients in the food. And so you can have the non-organic carrots in the grocery store be more nutritious than the local organic carrots in the farmer's market. So there is no connection, it seems, to the things that people from the food movement like me, like I grew up on an organic farm. My parents ran an organic farming organization. They started the farmers market in my hometown. They've been running a CSA since 1991, right? I come from the food movement and I was taught by my cultural framework, we are better people, our food is more nutritious. But when you actually take those crops and you bring them to a lab and you measure them, you don't find that that's true. What you find is that the farmers who optimize the level of life in the soil are the ones who got the highest level of nutrients. And just because you use compost or just because you use cover crops does not mean you have high levels of life in your soil. You have to actually maintain an environment where the microbiome is flourishing to get that. So yeah, just because you're organic does not mean you've got high levels of nutrients. It's really unfortunate. People, from my my community would be really happy if I was saying something different. But I also went to the university and I studied biochemistry and I studied organic chemistry and I studied physics and I studied microbiology and it looks like these are what's coming out. And then so finally the piece of the research that we're doing is we're actually building these handheld sensors, which it'll be one of the cameras in your phone. Literally, like there's this thing called the Hubble Space Telescope. People have heard about the Hubble, they've heard of the James Webb Telescope. They use a science called spectroscopy, and they can basically take a picture of the light coming off of stars to tell you what those stars are made up of and all kinds of other stuff. So they can tell you that this planet 10,000 light years away has methane in its atmosphere. Like no probe was sent 10,000 light years away, took a sample of the atmosphere and brought it back. It was just the light coming through the atmosphere of that planet that was read with a spectrometer, which said this atmosphere has this in it because that's the science of spectroscopy. We can measure things based on the frequency of light that they have. So if you can measure something 10,000 light years away with a flash of light, our proposal is you can measure something a millimeter away with a flash of light. And so we have, with hyperspectral imaging and other sort of mini spectrometers in phones, we're going to be in a place in the next couple of years where people are going to be able to pull their phone out of their pocket, open up the app, and flash a light at the carrot or the broccoli or the beef and actually read the relative nutrient levels. Like this one is 80 out of 100 or 20 out of 100. So I mean, that's what the research is. It feels very exciting. It has promises to be quite disruptive. Um, because currently the supply chain is not focused on measuring nutrition. It's much more about like, does it have holes in it? Is it uniform? Um, things like that. And you get paid by weight if you're a farmer. If it looks perfect, and then you get paid by weight. And perfect is, uniformity, which I'm not sure that's necessarily perfection, but that's a whole other conversation. Um, anyway, yeah.
So, if I'm understanding correctly, it sounds like the nutrient density of the food can really vary. And, maybe something might have a certification or it may be local, but that doesn't always mean that it might be more nutrient dense. Now, what about, you did grow up in the organic movement. What about the impact of pesticides and pesticide residues that may be on food? And how could that potentially, impact people's health?
Yeah. Well, so there's nutrients and anti-nutrients. So I don't think there's any, question about the fact that toxic chemicals that kill things are generally bad for you and your children. So let's not make any mistake about me saying chemicals are good. I'm not saying that. I'm saying if you are a 1,000-acre farmer who uses a little bit of fertilizer and has healthy plants, you don't need insecticides and fungicides because your plants are healthy and there are none on your carrots. And so that non-organic carrot in the grocery store could be more nutritious and not have toxins. So there does seem to be a really nice connection between the higher the nutrient levels, the lower the toxins. Um, so not that we can measure toxins with a spectrometer because those are present in parts per billion or parts per trillion, which is at a very, very low concentration range and very difficult to measure. Um, um, there are some cautionary tales. There's a friend of mine who's a agronomist out west, and she was telling me a story of two wheat growers. I think they were in Montana, and one of them was a quote unquote regenerative wheat grower, who had beautiful cover crops they put in the fall, beautiful diverse polyculture cover crops. They're 6 feet tall. In the spring, they come through and they spray, I think it's a pint of Roundup per acre to kill the cover crops. And they come in and they without disturbing the soil, plant the wheat seeds in this basically now a dead like mulch layer in the spring. And the organic farmer comes through. Maybe they've got cover crops, maybe they don't. I don't actually remember that in that story, but they have to till the land to um, kill the weeds, kill the plants that are there, and then they have to cultivate the land 3 or 4 times to keep the weeds down. Um, and when those wheats are harvested at the end of the year, the organic farmer fails the glyphosate residue test. There is Roundup on that organic farmer's wheat, even though they didn't apply it. And the regenerative farmer has no glyphosate residue on their wheat, even though they did apply it. And the question then becomes how. And the fact is, chemicals are everywhere, and they come down in the rain. Like, what do they say? 70% of every rainstorm, or 70% of the rain has Roundup in it. Like, it rains chemicals on everybody's land, on everybody's head, and everybody's lawn, everywhere because there's such prevalence in the ecosystem. But how was that removed in the farm where they actually even sprayed it and then it came down in the rain? Where did it go? And the answer is the microbiome was so functional that they're able to digest those toxins. Right? Microbes have the ability to disassemble the compound that is glyphosate or is atrazine or dicamba or PCBs or PFAS or all these toxic chemicals that are part of our environment can be easily digested by microbes. And so when you have a well-functioning microbiome on your land and in your plants, small amounts of toxins applied, whether by a person or by the rain or whatever, are digested by the microbes. Um, and they're no longer present. So I may be getting too much into the technical weeds here, but I think it's really exciting to know that like people are like, oh my God, we've got microplastics and we've got all the rest of the stuff and the whole world is toxic. And what do we do? Like, actually, the microbes, the bottom of the food chain, are really, really powerful. And when you work with them to support them in flourishing, they take care of a lot of the stuff for us. And we don't actually need to be so afraid um, if we work with nature. That the opportunity here, and hopefully the lesson is that nature is very powerful. And the more we work with her, the more we're supported. And yeah, so again, long answer, but hopefully illustrative.
Good. What types of food should consumers look for when they shop so that they can maximize the nutrients they're receiving from their food?
Um, what did Michael Pollan say? If your grandmother wouldn't recognize it, it's not food. Um, Maybe great grandmother at this point in time because he said that a while ago. Um, uh, yeah, I mean, personally, I use things that like I can pretty much see like where it came from, like nature. Like it is a cabbage, or if it's butter, I kind of know what butter is. I don't use spreadable thing, blah blah. Sauerkraut's great because I know what it is now. You got from cabbage, but like um bars and the more labels, the more ingredients, the more processed, the more I would say I like to say um there's junk and there's food. Don't make the mistake of putting those two words together. It's like saying night day or hot cold or wet dry to say junk food. So there's ultra processed products which are, can be ingested, but then also have sort of detrimental implications on you. And there are the natural things that we have evolved to eat. And, maybe you didn't understand that a lot of the fiber in the brown rice is really helpful for your microbes to function. But when you take the brown off of the rice, like you human may get nutrients, but your microbes don't, and they're foundational in your flourishing. So white bread, like you've taken the goodness out of the wheat to make a thing which maybe you can eat, but actually defeats the purpose of supporting your microbiome. And so there's so many things. When you take a carrot and you juice it and you remove the fiber is actually critical for your microbiome to function. So the more you take whole foods and process them for one reason or another, which you may have a rational justification for in almost all cases, the implications are negative to your overall system function. So I say whole foods as much as possible or immediate derivatives of, and the more nutritious, the better, but start off with just eating things that are from a whole food place, if that makes sense. Um,
Absolutely. Yes, that definitely makes sense. How can society foster a more sustainable and resilient food system that benefits both farmers and consumers?
um, I think money is the most powerful force in the culture today, for better, for worse. Like how you spend your money is is what you feed. If you don't like, I don't know what's an example of what you don't like. Some sort of propaganda or media or something out there, and yet you go and happily pay X number of dollars a month to this company. Um, you are feeding the beast. You are part of the problem, right? I mean, if you want your children to be healthy, but whenever we're in the grocery store, you buy them their little sugary treats. Like, okay, you are the problem. You are with your money causing the problem to continue itself. And so, um, I think if people were to use their money to buy whole foods and ideally foods that were more nutritious than others, that would suck the life force out of the processed products. Um, I mean, I don't know. It's but it's so insidious. It's everywhere, right? I mean, there's this, well, I have this snack and I have this treat and and it's a treat for myself. Well, is it a treat if it's actually systemically detrimental to your being and it's systemically detrimental to the ecosystem and to your child? Like, I mean, we have our ways of like making excuses for ourselves and justifying these things, but I mean, you can tell yourself whatever story you want. I mean, the Germans told themselves that Hitler was okay, right? I mean, there's lots of stories we tell ourselves, but that doesn't make it true. So yeah, I'd say use your money to buy the best food possible and really do not purchase things that are detrimental. And that's the only power each of us has, right? We can talk about policy solutions that would be great, or if this happened or if that happened, but actually what you can do is you can choose.
What do you see as the future of healthy and environmentally sustainable food?
Well, um, I mean, for everything we can see, it is more efficient to work with nature. Actually, it's a lower cost of production. It's better business. When a farmer knows how to work with nature, their profitability goes up. And so our organizational sort of strategy is empower people to choose the food that's more nutritious, and that'll sort of put a finger on the scale, which incentivizes farmers to focus on nutrition. And the only way to get higher levels of nutrition in food is to improve soil health, and that sort of weans you off of the fertilizers and the chemicals. And so, it begins to normalize this process of improving soil health, which improves plant health, which improves nutritional caliber. Um, um, I think one of the biggest impediments is that farmers have not been taught how nature works. They've been taught how to buy and apply products by people who are selling them products. And so they're basically ignorant. Um, as to how to work most well with nature. And so there's this issue of like getting a critical mass of knowledge into the ecosystem and decommoditizing so we can actually differentiate. So maybe this wheat you get paid an extra 15% for this wheat, or potatoes or beef or whatever it is. But and the other exciting thing is climate change. You know, I mean, the extremes of climate change are such that soils that are in rough shape can't support the plants and they die. And so, you know, after 30, 40, 50, 80 years of chemical agriculture, a lot of our lands are in rough shape. And with the greater and greater extremes we have of the climate imbalances, whether extreme droughts or cold or heat or whatever it is, the soils that have better organic matter, better water infiltration, etc., are soils where plants will grow in these extremes, whereas the dirt that is this, you know, land which has really been abused just cannot support the plants in getting to harvest. So um, I think it's going to be critical for farmers to work with nature just to survive. And it's too bad that we're in that place, um, but I think there's an amazing opportunity on the other side of that, which is that we can reverse climate change. We can heal these ecological imbalances. We can balance the climate and the weather and stuff like that. It's actually nature flourishing, which is what balances the climate. And it's not about carbon, it's about the water cycle and all kinds of other things also. And in really short order, if we farm well, we can begin to heal any number of apparently sort of intransigent existential issues. So, I think the pleasure pain principle says that, the more painful things become, the more likely we are to change. And I think we're at one of those points where our children are sick and the climate is quite imbalanced. And so we've got it's a wonderful incentive for us to straighten up our act. And I think beautiful things can happen if we all take our power and choose the best things for our families.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks so much for framing this critical time as a time for opportunity and change. And yeah, thank you for the work that you're doing through your organization and for joining the podcast today. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.